One of the skills I'd like to work on this year is annotating text, and we're going to begin with a practice on Virginia Woolf's The Death of a Moth. So one of the first steps in annotating a text is to turn the title into a question. So if we look at the title, we can come up with a couple of possibilities. So one possibility is, why did the moth die? Another possibility might be, how did it happen? And we're hoping to answer these questions as we read through the passage. And you'll notice that I'm marking right on the text. As we're annotating, that's one of the differences between that and simply taking notes. We will be writing directly on the text, marking and underlining, circling, maybe highlighting, but we're not taking notes on a separate piece of paper. So the next step is to underline or mark the topic sentence or the main idea of each paragraph. I'm going to scroll up just a little bit, and then we're going to try to find the main idea or the topic sentence that kind of tells us what the whole paragraph's about. So if I take my little pencil here, we have the idea of moths are hybrid creatures. The beginning of this paragraph talks about how they're a little bit different than butterflies and also a little different than part of their own species, the ones that are at night. We're talking about the day moths. Something else I might circle in this particular paragraph, she alludes to the time period, which is mid-September, and she has an excellent example of figurative language. The rooks, too, were keeping one of their annual festivities, soaring round the treetops until it looked as if a vast net with thousands of black knots in it had been cast up into the air, which after a few moments sank slowly down upon the trees until every twig seemed to have a knot at the end of it. I find it helpful, too, to mark vocabulary that I may not know or I'm not sure of completely. So vociferation, I would mark. We have some context clues, the word clamor, but it's something to mark if you come across a word that is unfamiliar or you're just not completely sure. Okay, we're going to scroll up a little bit for the second paragraph. And you'll notice that she has the repeating idea of energy. She ended the first paragraph with tremendously exciting experience. And then we begin this paragraph with the same energy. And it gives us kind of a pinpoint of where the moth is. Sent the moth fluttering from side to side of his square of the window pane. So now we know where the moth is. And she mentions here that she could not help watching him, and she had a queer feeling of pity for him. So why does she pity him? There's a lot of movement that takes place in this paragraph. So let's look at the last sentence here, and then I'm going to scroll up a little bit more. But it says, watching him, it seemed as if a fiber. All right, and hang with me here. So watching him, it seemed as if a fiber, very thin but pure of the enormous energy of the world, had been thrust into his frail and diminutive body. You have this idea of movement that keeps repeating. So what I would think about here is, we had the question earlier, why did she pity the moth? But also here, think about what the movement represents. Does it represent anything outside of the poem? So any outside connections? In other words, is she attempting to create a metaphor, some sort of a comparison? Looking at the next paragraph, she seems to be reviewing or coming back to ideas that she's had previously. So if we look at the underlined sentence, again, the thought of all that life might have been had he been born in any other shape caused one to view his simple activities with a kind of pity. And I think we can maybe relate this to some outside connections. So give that some thought as we move on to the next paragraph. We come back to the idea of movement. In this particular paragraph, he settled on the window ledge. I'm going to mark this with a 1, and you'll notice some changes as we continue in the paragraph. Just a sentence or two down, he was trying to resume his dancing, but seemed either so stiff or so awkward that he could only flutter to the bottom of the window pane. And I think at this point you can kind of ask yourself, what is happening here? Okay, going down a little bit further. After perhaps a 7th attempt, he slipped from the wooden ledge and fell, fluttering his wings to his back on the windowsill. Okay, we should notice a change in things that are happening. The legs agitated themselves once more. Okay, a little jerk. A pause of exhaustion. The legs fluttered again. It was superb, this last protest. Finally, it says, the struggle was over. Think back at this point to the questions we posed with the title. Why did the moth die? And also, how did it happen? We can answer both of those questions. And I think it's good, too, to look at these suggested questions that came with the particular text. Think about her purpose in writing it. Exploration, informative, trying to argue a point, convince the readers. What does make this a memorable piece of text? And what is it that she's claiming? What do you think is the purpose in writing about this moth? What is kind of the message outside of what she says about the moth?